Welcome to the Holy Post. Swifties are celebrating the record-breaking release of 2 new albums, but some conservative Christians are not happy. They're accusing Taylor Swift of mocking Christianity and promoting witchcraft. Our resident Swiftie, Kaitlyn Schiess, explains the controversy. Then, former presidential speechwriter and contributor to The Atlantic, Pete Wehner, is back to talk to me about the future of the Republican Party. Will the Trump spell ever break? Also this week, the end of America's monoculture and how dumb were dinosaurs. A few announcements before we start. First, we had to trim a little bit of this episode featuring me, Caitlin, and Mike Erie, but we've posted that extra bit, about 7 minutes, exclusively for our Holy Post Plus subscribers. There's also a new Skye Pod episode coming this week where I talk to Shane Claiborne about the Israel-Palestine conflict and pacifism, and Caitlin has a new Getting Schooled episode about cessationism. All of this is exclusively for Holy Post Plus subscribers, and if you want to sign up, go to holypost.com to learn more. All right, here is episode 615. Hey everyone, it's Skye. Welcome back to, I was going to say the Skye Pod, but it's not. I'm not doing the Skye Pod. I'm doing the flagship Holy Post show. Welcome to the Holy Post. Joining me is Kaitlyn Schiess. Hi, Caitlin.
Hi, Skye.
Back in front of your books where you belong. And we have a special third wheel with us today.
Always. Yep.
It's everyone's favorite Holy Post pundit / host of the Voxology podcast / pastor at the Journey, where are you at?
Journey Church, baby.
Journey Church.
Named after the band. Absolutely.
It's Mike
Our
Erie.
motto is don't stop believing.
Nice.
So
that's good.
And faithfully is how we want to portray marriage. And I mean, it's great. Anyway, go ahead.
Okay, well, welcome to the show, Mike.
I had therapy this morning. So I am here, Skye, as a non-anxious presence. All right, for whatever shenanigans you guys have planned, I am here today. I'm responsive, not reactive, and I am here as a non-anxious presence.
I'm glad we scheduled this.
Bring it on.
Day you were with your therapist.
That's
I can't imagine what it's like in 4 or 5 days. So grateful for that. Let's get into the theme song.
What's the news that you like the most? Who's your favorite podcast host? If it's breakfast, get your toast. It's Skye and Phil and the Holy Post. Skye and Phil and the Holy Post.
And sometimes Kaitlyn.
Hey, are you a pastor or ministry leader? Would you like to continue your education without having to step away from your current ministry? You need to know about the new Doctor of Ministry degree program at Wheaton College. Interact with world-class Wheaton faculty, some of whom you've gotten to know right here on the Holy Post podcast, as well as students from a broad range of theological traditions and perspectives, and expand your cultural intelligence to lead well in a contemporary, globalized world. The flexible hybrid format, most of your learning will be online with 1 week a semester at the Wheaton campus, allows you to earn your Doctor of Ministry degree while still serving in your current ministry role. You can learn and serve at the same time. So maybe it's time to sharpen your practical ministry skills in a biblically grounded, culturally relevant program. Check out the Doctor of Ministry program at the Wheaton College Grad School. Go to wheaton.edu/holypost. That's wheaton.edu/holypost. And thanks to the Wheaton College Grad School for sponsoring this episode.
Americans have a pretty unhealthy relationship with the news, and Christians aren't exempt. We tend to either engage obsessively and be overcome by anxiety or check out completely. News organizations are part of the problem, hooking audiences with fear, anger, and sensationalism, plus a heavy dose of partisanship. The Pour Over is different. They're a free news resource that stays politically neutral and pairs news stories with an eternal perspective. Their newsletter comes to your inbox on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, summarizing your need-to-know updates in a way you'll actually understand and enjoy. In 6 minutes or less, they'll catch you up on what's going on in the world and point you towards eternal hope. I regularly read the Pour Over, and I love that they pair informative news with important reminders of Christian truth. To stay informed while remaining focused on Christ, go to thepourover.org/holy-post and subscribe to The Pour Over for free today. To stay informed while remaining focused on Christ, go to thepourover.org/holy-post and subscribe to The Pour Over for free today, or search for The Pour Over today wherever you listen to podcasts. Thanks again to The Pour Over for sponsoring this episode.
Okay, before we jump into the content today, I'm sure a lot of you are wondering, well, where is Phil? You said Phil was gone last week, and he's not back this week. And
Rapture? My guess is the rapture.
No, well, that would cause many problems.
We were all left behind.
Yeah, that would cause many problems given the videos that I've put out recently. Phil, I talked to him earlier today, and he will share the whole story next week when he's back. But he wanted me to just convey that they have had a medical emergency in their family. And thankfully, they seem to be on the other side of the emergency part of that medical emergency, and things are looking better. And grateful there's a lot of people in our community who are close to Phil and the Vischer clan and are helping. And Phil's very grateful for all that and grateful for everyone's prayers. Continue to pray for them. He will fill you in on the details when he comes back, but know that they're in a much better place than they were a week ago, but that's kind of what's been going on. So our prayers are with him and Lisa and the family, and looking forward to having Phil back where he belongs on the Holy Post. And well wishes and prayers for them are appreciated. But until then, Mike's with us. So grateful to have you here, Mike.
I mean, I'm glad to be here, but not hearing about Phil. That's awful.
Yeah, but like I said, things are looking much, much better. Let's get into animal news. We're starting with some animal news today.
Oh, look at you.
It's extinct animal news, which is even better.
Oh.
Okay.
That's two categories.
Let me ask you guys, how smart do you think a Tyrannosaurus Rex was?
Not very.
On a scale of Skye, Phil, or Kaitlyn, I'm going to go with Phil.
I'm not sure what that means.
Yeah, I don't.
I don't either. But all right, I'm going to go with not very either.
Okay. Well, then there's a second question: is how do you even determine how smart a dinosaur was?
I don't know.
All right. Great question.
Yep.
Brain size?
Yep.
Getting close. Yep. Yeah. Okay. So
arm size.
Here's the story. So back in December of 2022, Vanderbilt University neuroscientist Susanna Herculano-Huzel published a paper that caused an uproar in the dinosaur world. All right, this is like a year and a half ago.
Come on.
So this is what she did. After analyzing previous research on fossilized dinosaur brain cavities and the neuron counts of birds and other related living animals, Herculano-Huzel extrapolated that the fearsome Tyrannosaurus Rex may have had more than 3 billion neurons, which is more than a baboon. So as a result, she argued that the predators could have been smart enough to make and use tools and to form
if they had hands
and to form social cultures akin to those seen in present-day primates. That's my question. Is how wouldn't that be the worst existence in the world, to have the intelligence to make tools and have these stupid little arms unable to use them?
Yep. Yeah. So how smart were they then?
Well, this is the
Not
controversy.
very.
Okay, so this is why this is not news from 2 years ago. There has been a new paper published in the esteemed Journal of the Anatomical Record.
Yep.
Which feels like
I get it monthly.
You get it? You probably have your own reoccurring column, don't you?
Titled Peak and Pit.
Yeah, at our age,
it's about archaeology.
We could have a section there of new things that are growing on us every month. Okay. An international team of paleontologists, neuroscientists, and behavioral scientists have argued with Herculano-Huzel's assumptions about brain cavity size and the corresponding neuron count. So here's what's interesting. They argue that it's likely that the T-Rex's intelligence was much closer to the modern day crocodile than to primates.
That seems right.
Okay, but here's the thing. Like, I'm sure you've seen or read Jurassic Park. Like,
both.
The best science right now says that birds likely evolved from reptiles and dinosaurs. So the original study took the brain cavities of birds and looked at how big a brain of a bird is relative to its cavity size. And then, so the original study went back and compared the cavity size of a fossilized T-Rex skull and then extrapolated how big must T-Rex's brain have been compared to a modern day bird. And that's where you get this very proportionally large brain, which could lend itself to higher intelligence, including social dynamics, like a primate. Like, we never think of reptiles functioning like primates in like social groups. But the new study says that was a mistake, because apparently bird's brain actually fills most of its brain cavity. But other reptiles, like crocodiles, only about 30 to 50% of the brain cavity is actually filled with brain tissue. So the question is,
got a big hole.
We know how big a T-Rex's brain cavity is because we have the fossil, but we don't know how much of that cavity was actually filled with brain. And do you compare it to a bird or do you compare it to a crocodile? And depending on who you compare it to depends on what the intelligence must have been of this animal.
Yeah, I feel like you're attacking me personally. I feel like I have a large noggin, and I feel like there's some implication here. I know.
Well, I think what the lesson is just because somebody has a big head doesn't mean we know what it's filled with.
Doesn't mean they're smart. Yeah.
Well, okay, but that's hurtful because I've always said I needed a big head to fit a big brain, and now that might not be true.
Might not be true. Only might.
Well,
Could still
that's
be
right.
true.
We won't know until the autopsy. And so at the end of it all, they went back to the original researcher, this Herculano Huzel, whatever her name is. And she seemed to take the criticism of her original research in stride. And she said, readers should analyze the evidence and draw their own conclusions. That's what science is about. So,
Yeah.
Okay. I mean,
Yep. Skye, I want to thank you for bringing this up.
First of all, I think the thought of a highly intelligent and social tool-making T-Rex
Is awesome.
is awesome. I mean, what a great movie that would be. Don't you think?
Yes. I think Spielberg should redo it. I think we should need to reboot the franchise.
I agree. But on the other hand, if T-Rexes were that smart, why aren't they still around?
That's what I'm asking. Yep.
wow.
What do you mean, wow? I think this is interesting.
I mean, it is interesting. Well, isn't it kind of like when we realized that maybe all of our drawings, like color drawings of dinosaurs, weren't correct because we realized we had faulty assumptions about.
Yeah.
I just want to know who's spending a lot of time on this. On
Academics.
God bless them.
Academics, Kaitlyn. That's who's spending a lot of time
Hey.
on this.
some of us are doing
Not as much as you should.
really
apparently.
meaningful work.
Yeah. Show us your form that you turned in, Kaitlyn.
Right. Did you figure out the intelligence of long extinct
Yeah.
reptiles?
No, you're right.
I don't think so.
I should really work on something more meaningful.
All right. Now we're going to get into your wheelhouse, Kaitlyn. Are you ready for this?
Yeah.
So, Kaitlyn, Taylor Swift
Oh,
dropped
yeah.
2 albums. I have to apologize. I don't have the hat you sent me with me.
I was waiting for it.
I know. So we should tell everybody, Kaitlyn, in her generosity and her snarkiness, sent me a gift, which arrived at my house.
You needed
last
a
week.
new
I
hat?
do. Phil's
Yeah.
always making fun of the fact that I only wear this Miami hat. And Mike,
It's beautiful.
where's your
It's
Miami
beautiful.
hat?
I'm waiting for you to send me one. I don't have a good one. The Voxology crew sent you a gift too, just so you know. It's on its way.
It's in the mail. Right?
Mike, I'll send you one of the ones I sent Skye. Then you can
So
match.
Kaitlyn sent me a Swiftie hat, a baseball hat.
Yeah. You're welcome.
Nice.
So
Where and you conveniently don't have it for this segment.
well, no, I
Skye?
I didn't
Right.
realize we were going to talk about this today. And now after looking at this article, which I will share with you both in a second, I'm not sure I should endorse Taylor Swift
Gosh.
because
Well said.
she might
Well said.
she might be a witch. So
Oh my
Okay.
gosh.
The paganism, the just sheer paganism.
so Kaitlyn, fill us in. What like she released these albums? What's the big hubbub
Yeah.
about her new albums?
Well, first of all, it was just a big deal. I mean, people were excited for the first new album that we knew was coming out that she announced, and people were surprised because she's been on her massive world tour. So who has time to write, produce, etc. a new album?
Good thing she's not an academic, right?
An Enneagram 3, that's who. She's on top of it. She released one new album, and then, all the Swifties on the internet do all this sleuthing to figure out the clues. And there were people saying it's going to be a double album. And other people were like, no, it won't be. And then at 2:00 in the morning, after the midnight release of the original, The Tortured Poets Department, was the anthology. So it was 2 albums, 31 songs that she wrote and produced and created all while on her world tour.
Are any of them about football?
A little bit.
Okay,
Yeah.
just checking.
I mean, there's a few that seem to be pretty explicitly about Travis Kelce, including one that talks about someone who plays ball. You play ball, and I know Aristotle is a line that
Okay.
the girls on the
So
internet
Kaitlyn,
have
be honest,
loved.
how much time have you spent listening to this album instead of doing your coursework in German studies?
It's not an instead of. It's a both and kind of situation
Okay.
here.
Maybe you should be listening to
listen while
German
you
artists.
work.
Yeah, you can study German
should,
and listen
you're
to
right.
Taylor Swift.
Yeah.
You're right.
Okay, but honestly, how much time have you spent listening to this new album? Have you
A lot. I've listened to the whole thing many times.
So you are fully
Yes.
marinated in the extensive profanities of this album.
It's a lot to process, so I cannot claim to have really processed it all, but I have listened to it all multiple times.
Okay, well, there's multiple articles about what is in this new album, and in the Religion News service, they have an article, and it says that Swift's faith appears more fluid in this album. In the past, she has said she's a Christian, but she's from
a little bit. Yeah.
She's from your neck of the woods, Mike. So we it's hard to know exactly what she meant by that. The article was on to say that her religious references in this new double album drop are as eclectic as a Brooklyn gift shop. Well-worn Christian metaphors sit alongside more bohemian mishmash of witchcraft, divination, and paganism.
Whoa!
Yeah.
It's true.
Put that on a hat.
There you go. It's a patchwork of religious allusions from the Good Samaritan and Jehovah's Witnesses to altar sacrifices and prophecies. A lot of stuff there.
True.
And I appreciated this. The article goes on to say that in a way, her mishmash of religious allusions is emblematic of Gen Z and millennials to whom she writes, right? Most of her audience are in that demographic. This was surprising me. 51%, according to Springtide Research, 51% of Gen Zs, or this is the population 13 to 25, that's Gen Z, right? Yeah, that's Gen Z.
Yeah.
51% of Gen Zs use tarot cards to engage in fortune telling.
What percent?
51%.
Wow.
That's crazy high. And Swift references that in some of the songs. She knows her audience, they say. She knows that they're dabbling in everything from spells to astrology. Okay. So, Kaitlyn, when you listened to the album, what jumped out to you being a theologian and well-versed in religious allusions? What jumped out to you in the album that you thought, for good or ill, and what was your take on her religious allusions?
I mean, they were definitely increased in these two albums, but she's done this before. And I think it's really important to note that, like, people are freaking out about this because she's so famous and so huge. And one of the few people who really kind of can get a fan base that spans a lot of demographics. It's probably her and Beyonce are like the ones that can kind of command so many people.
And Pearl Jam. But yeah, go ahead.
Okay.
Pearl Jam, of course, a reference to Jesus' parable of the pearl of great value. So
Right. Okay, you too. But here's what I find really interesting is that people are freaking out about, I shouldn't say freaking out, they're making criticisms of her use of biblical and religious imagery for other uses, like talking about the crucifixion and rolling away the stone while talking about a romantic relationship, or talking about how Christians were judgmental in the context of a romantic relationship, or talking about I would die for his sins in the context of a romantic relationship. I do find it a little grating that people are so upset about use of biblical language for this other purpose when it comes to Taylor Swift, but not when Republican politicians use scripture for their political purposes.
There it is. I'm snapping.
And I agree that we should be wary of when biblical language gets used for purposes foreign to it. I do think there's some difference here in that this has been a common use for most of history, that people have drawn from different literary traditions to make a poetic point, and that's what she's doing. I think Christians should be thoughtful and critical and notice when scripture is being used and ask to what end is it being used and evaluate whether it's good or faithful, or what we can learn from it. To the point of the RNS article, we can learn something about the experience, especially of a lot of young women when it comes to religion, that can help us understand them better, can help us share the gospel better. Like, we can learn things from this. But I do find it really frustrating that we're really harsh on a young woman using this in the context of her experience of the world, and not just in romantic relationships. She's talking about her public perception and public criticism. We're not nearly as critical when politicians use this for policies that we like. We're kind of turning a blind eye to that.
And do you think that the reaction would be different if Taylor Swift was an outspoken political conservative rather than more progressive?
Yeah, we're happy in that context to say, like, wow, look, biblical language is just shaping our culture and our world. And I mean, it's kind of, we talked about this a bunch on the show. It's one reference that I pay attention to a lot. America as a city upon a hill has been used in every Republican debate during this primary. And it has never been, to my knowledge, at least it's been rarely connected to Jesus's Sermon on the Mount. It's been connected to Ronald Reagan and American history. So we're happy for that to be so completely plucked from its biblical context that we don't even recognize it as the words of Jesus anymore. But when we recognize these as biblical allusions in Taylor Swift, we assume it's mocking Christians or anti-Christian instead of asking, what is happening here? How are these things being used literarily in ways that can help us understand what she's saying better and help us understand the people she's writing for better? And not defending any of her particular theological convictions. I don't know what they are, but this does help us see an experience that someone has had. Madison Pierce, who's a New Testament scholar, wrote a great article in Mockingbird about all of these religious references as an understanding of how people are deconstructing today or how people are understanding their relationship to the church. You don't have to agree with her. You don't have to think that how she just understands her Christianity, which she has claimed at least kind of minimally in the past, in order to learn something from this, which is how we should be responding to the politicians too. Not just saying, great, I'm glad they quoted scripture, but going, what does this tell me about my country and what people are looking for and what they want?
So to take it over to you, Mike, what I hear you saying, Kaitlyn, is...
This is my wheelhouse, by the way.
Yeah. Are you a Swiftie? Do you like Taylor Swift music? Do you listen to it much?
I've got a blank space.
Oh, gosh.
With her name.
No, but seriously, are you well-versed in Taylor Swift world?
I'm not even a little versed.
Oh, good. I feel better.
But when the T Swift world intersects with the NFL world, then see, that works both ways. It's not just the Swifties coming over to the New Heights podcast that they host, the Kelsey brothers, but it's all about the football folks going, look at these Swifties, they're awesome, and they're asking great questions about what is a first down and a punt. I mean, that's brilliant.
Wow. Yeah. Mike, that's so generous.
Okay, so let's get into what Kaitlyn just articulated here, because I think it's really valuable. What you seem to be saying is, if the person using biblical language belongs to my group or tribe, I'm going to celebrate their use of biblical language as evidence of Christians' influence on whatever it is we're talking about. But if the person using biblical references or Christian language is not part of my tribe, the assumption is they're using that language to mock my faith and to ridicule it. But it's all about what identity or tribe we assume they belong to. And because Taylor Swift is assumed to be outside of the conservative Christian, white, MAGA, whatever labels you want to put it, because she's outside of that, her use of this language is seen as must be mocking, and she must not be respecting who we are as Christians.
And the end of it. Like, people are totally happy for Republican politicians to use scripture towards what I would consider pretty unjust, evil ends, as long as I like them. Like, if those policies are things I like, even if it's, to my perspective, a really wrongful use of scripture, if it's a policy I already like, that's great. But in this case, I don't like the end, which is Swift's sexual ethic, so it must be a bad use of scripture, instead of first asking, is this a good use of scripture?
Mike, do you know who Shane Pruitt is?
No, but I know that Taylor Swift was trouble when she first walked in.
Okay, he's just going to keep pulling lyrics out. All right, so Shane Pruitt.
I don't know who Shane is.
Okay, he is the National Next Gen Director for the Southern Baptist Convention's North American Mission Board. That's the title here. National Next Gen Director. So
let's make an acrostic of that.
Yeah, it's anyway. So he posted on Facebook in response to Swift's new album, urging Christian parents to seriously reconsider if they should allow their children to listen to Swift's music. Here's what he said.
I mean,
hold on, I will get your reaction too, Kaitlyn. But Mike, I want to hear your response. Here's what he said: I'm definitely not the minister or parent that has the no secular music stance. He wrote. Also, I fully realize unbelievers are going to act like unbelievers. However, and the however is in all caps, there is a difference. There is a difference between being secular and being anti-Christian. Anti-Christian is in all caps. And he goes on to say that he used to listen to Taylor Swift's music, but now he thinks it's time to reconsider.
Yeah.
Goes on to say that the lyrics aren't just different than what you believe, they are actually mocking what you believe. That was his interpretation of all this. So Mike.
Yeah.
I mean, your kids are
Yes.
a little bit older, more closer to my kids' ages, but are you now going to forbid them from listening to Taylor Swift's music?
Yeah, well, Shane needs to shake it off. That's the big thing. When I read that article, Skye and Kaitlyn, I'm just reminded of how much I've come to see that Christianity, some circles of Christianity, the predominant way they see the world is that they are under threat, and they are threatened by everything. And so the immense popularity, as Kaitlyn was referencing, of Taylor, if there's anything sketchy, we're going to pull that under the microscope. And I'm all for discernment. Absolutely. I think discernment can come from one of two places, though. Discernment can come from curiosity, which is what Kaitlyn is so beautifully like exemplifying. Hey, why do people find this attractive? What are these messages really about? Versus a discernment that is almost defensive in nature because everything's a threat. And the goal of Christian parenting is keeping our kids safe so that they arrive in their honeymoons as virgins or something, instead of actually teaching them wisdom. We're just sheltering them from the storm. And obviously there's a place for that, but no, I would much rather. So my son and I, he loves Kendrick Lamar. And Kendrick is talking about things that are vastly beyond both of our experiences. And he's doing it in language that is not church-approved language. But he and I have so many great conversations about what it is he's talking about, why my son enjoys that music and the perspective it gives him, that I wouldn't want to cut myself off from those conversations just by writing a blank, all caps, however. I would rather engage as not only a disciple of Jesus, but as a parent in the art of active discernment, which means engaging in all of the things rather than just sitting and defending and feeling like we're threatened by them.
Yeah, I think the easy approach is to just look at the whole world and put everything into the good bucket and the bad bucket, the righteous bucket, the wicked bucket. And instead of wrestling with, most things are usually a combination. Most of us are a combination of
Totally.
Right. And
the double standard that Kaitlyn's pointing out is the double standard that exists everywhere. As long as imagery is employed for ends that I deem worthy and just, I'm okay with it. But the minute it's not, now we're under threat. And so I want to practice a Christianity, and I want to be a part of a community that practices this genuine sort of gentle curiosity about why it is that. Because I see people all the time looking at Jordan Peterson and saying, man, what's the deal? Why are people listening to that guy? Or Andrew Tate or Mark Driscoll? And it's easy to write all of that off. It's much harder to sit and ask the questions. Why is this attractive? What is this appealing to? Is there any redemptive thing about it? Because of course, when we get to like the world, in Greek, world can mean three different things. It's the same word. It can mean the inhabited earth, the humans who inhabit the earth. It can mean like the created system, or it could mean the hostile environment and culture that sets itself up as opposed to God. What the world doesn't mean is non-Christian culture.
Right.
And so it's incumbent on the church in this and in loads of other areas to become people that are actually trying to embody wisdom. And the only way wisdom comes about, I think, is not only through the fear of the Lord, but through being curious about what it is, why these things are gaining such traction in culture. So I love what Kaitlyn was saying. And that message would resonate with Gen Z far more than Shane Pruitt, who's probably a 50-year-old, dude.
No. He's the next gen director. So he's got to be young, right?
Not on the basis of the all caps usage.
Kaitlyn, let me back up, because when I was reading his quote and he said that parents should reconsider letting their children listen to Swiss music, you kind of gave an interesting look. Like, like there's a thought there.
Yeah, I mean, some of the criticism has been, this isn't safe for my kids. And I don't think this is a new thing. Her last few albums have been the same, where there is profanity, there is like explicit sexual material. I don't think this music is music for kids. Like, this should be something parents are considering. What is an age appropriate way to expand? And there are clean versions of some of it, but even the content itself, like it's pretty mature. What the song is about is pretty mature. So I don't think there's anything wrong with saying like, yeah, you should make wise choices about at what age this is appropriate to introduce your kid to.
Yeah.
But I also chafe a little bit against some of the kind of tone of this has been, oh, this was safe. I didn't have to think about it. Now I do.
Right.
And it's like that. It's not someone's job, especially someone who is, a musician with a public career that is not making music for Christians or for kids, for the music to be appropriate for them. You do have to do work to figure out if it's good for them.
And that's the point. And that work can either come from a place of joyful non-compliance and curiosity, or kind of the under threat defensiveness that we see embodied in loads of places.
Okay, I want to just, before we leave the story, I want to dive into one example that is featured in both of these articles that has been cited as a case of Swift being somewhat sacrilegious or mocking of Christianity. So one critic said the album is full of minor quips that elevate Swift above God, while also featuring 2 songs devoted to tearing down the Christian sexual ethic. I mean, I'm guessing there's probably more than 2 songs that challenge the Christian sexual ethic, but this whole idea that she's lifting herself up above God. I have not listened, full disclosure, I've not listened to the new album except when I've caught it in the background of my teenage daughter's world and community. There's a song called I Can Fix Him, No Really I Can. You're familiar with this, Kaitlyn?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Here's the lyric that apparently has got people's attention. And I'm not, do you want to possibly sing it for us, Kaitlyn?
Absolutely not. Read it. Please read it.
I don't know the melody or anything that goes with this. I'm just going to read it. They shake their heads saying, God help her. When I tell him he's my man, but your good Lord doesn't lift a finger, I can fix him. No, really I can. And only I can. Okay. So
Skye.
Wait. Let me give you my spin on this. When I first read that lyric, I thought, my assumption is that she is portraying a fairly head over heels, infatuated young woman who is naive and really believing that she can fix her guy. Like, he's got all these issues, but I can fix him. And I didn't take this as she's mocking God. I took it as she's dumb and naive. Am I right?
Okay. This is another, I'm glad you brought this up, because we didn't cover, I think, one of the other most important things about this story, which is people don't know how to read anymore. We talked about this last week, but people are taking so many of these lyrics in this very wooden, literal way. Right. And it doesn't surprise me, because this is how we've often been taught to read scripture too.
Come on.
But it's terrible. It's like we're not able to see metaphors for what they are, figurative language for what it is, prescriptive versus descriptive. In scripture, there are tons of examples of people talking to God the way she talks to God, having the experiences that she talks about. I mean, I taught on Genesis 31 in my church's youth group Sunday school last week. Everything in Genesis is a rated R, sexual,
bad
confused.
Blood. Lots of bad blood.
I mean, it's terrible. There's violence. There's incest. I mean, I literally asked the kids at the beginning, what have you learned from Genesis so far? And the first person was like a 16-year-old boy. And he was like, there's incest and there's deception. And I was like, yeah, that covers a lot of it. So I don't understand why we're not able to, as you were just saying, Skye, hear in this song someone expressing what they feel to be true in a circumstance. But even in the act of writing it the way she wrote it, it seems to be making a judgment herself on her past failures, which happens in scripture, happens in literature, happens in music. And our inability to read that well frightens me for our inability to read scripture.
It's almost as if she looks at herself and says, look at what you made me do.
I hope people are getting this. I hope that they're looking up all these songs and enjoying them.
As much as we may, and I have very little knowledge of Taylor Swift and her music, but just reading this, I was able to recognize there's a sarcasm here. It's a self-inflicted.
She's smart, okay? Yeah. She's doing something with this.
But the fact that these various critics, these Christian critics, think that this is her mocking God. So Movie Guide, which is this Christian, review site, has given a scathing review of these new albums. And the crescendo is this. This is a quote. Unfortunately, Swift has chosen the path toward death and is reaping the fruits of her labor.
Wow.
That's the level of judgment that is coming down from conservative Christian circles.
Yeah, you can hear Jesus saying something like that.
Oh my goodness.
I mean, it's just nutty.
Yeah. So What are we telling everybody in the Holy Post audience to do with Taylor Swift? Are we telling them to just wholeheartedly celebrate all of her debauchery and paganism and Christian mockery? Is that what they're hearing? Kaitlyn?
We're gonna take the really, wild and radical position of discern with the Holy Spirit and your community what to consume and how to consume it and how to think about it. Be a thoughtful person. Make wise decisions for your children. Do what Mike said and be curious. And this can be an opportunity. I mean, you really are getting an opportunity if you have determined with the guidance of the Holy Spirit that this is something that is okay for you to consume. You're getting an opportunity to get a real glimpse into how an entire generation of people are thinking about religion and the church. And you'll hear some truly very beautiful songs.
Okay, last story that I want to cover today. This one caught my attention, just the headline. I love the headline. Everything's a cult now. That's a space cult, C-U-L-T, not A-C-C-U-L-T. Everything's a cult now.
Well, unless you're Taylor Swift, then everything is a cult.
That's true. It's an interview in Vox, not Voxology, just Vox. And it features Derek Thompson. And let me just kind of give you the conceit. It was
awesome. That was a fascinating article.
Yeah. We'll link to it. And it's also, there's a podcast interview with him at the Gray Area podcast. So here's his premise. He says that in the late 19th century is when the concept of national reality was first possible. And that means the sense of having a national identity where a large group of people across a wide geographic area could actually share a single culture. He said you had technologies like the telephone and the telegraph that allowed newspapers to share information and report on information that was truly national. And that shared reality might have come to its fullest expression in the middle of the 20th century with the rise of television technology. You had just a handful of channels that were reaching tens of millions of people. You also had the rise of national newspapers, enormous machines for getting tens of millions of Americans to read about a shared reality. And so you move from the 19th century with the birth of this possibility of a shared reality to the 20th century, where you really have the rise of a kind of monoculture, which was never really possible for the vast majority of human history, which is really fascinating when you think about it. I remember watching or reading something about, there was, for most of human history, the fastest any communication could travel was the speed of a horse. And with the advent of the telegraph and then radio and all that, for the first time in human history, communication could expand way beyond the speed of a horse, and you could bind people together in a way that had never happened before. We recently had Tracy McKenzie, a historian from Wheaton College, on the show to talk about the Civil War era, and we talked about the fragmentation of news media leading up to the Civil War, because all you knew was what your local paper was reporting, because you couldn't hear what was happening in the North if you were in the South, and vice versa. And in many ways, what we've all lived through, especially me and you, Mike, going back into the 20th century, the Dark Ages, we lived in a monoculture, right? You remember when there were only a handful of TV channels and 3 nightly news shows, and that was it. Yep. And the country, there was a lot of negative things about the country still, of course, but how many tens of millions of people watched the Super Bowl? Or watch the finale of Seinfeld, or
the shuttle taking off,
right?
Or
the last episode of MASH, where we shared a common, but that we thought of that as normal. But what Derek Thompson and Tracy McKenzie are pointing out is that in the course of human history, that's really weird.
Yeah, that was interesting,
because most people just knew their local community and didn't have a wider vision of a shared monocultural identity. So then he goes on to basically argue that monoculture is over. He says the internet has forever shattered that reality, and there's no way we're going to go back to the pre-20th century, or we're not going back to the 20th century, we're going back to the pre-20th century culture, and it's actually just a bunch of cults stacked on top of each other, a bunch of mini local realities. And we can get into what he means by a cult, maybe, but just off the top, what do you guys think of that explanation for what we're seeing today in our world, this fragmentation of the monoculture? Don't everyone jump in at one time.
I think that's part of why some want to make America great again, because monoculture, obviously, the upside is there's unity but kind of at the cost of a certain uniformity, right? That we're all narrating the same story together, and whoever's controlling that story is controlling a disproportionate amount of the reality that people are seeing the world through. And so to have culture, it's like, I mean, I see this happening in the church, right? There used to be a much more monolithic church culture in America. And now there are cults of personality just sort of everywhere. Denominations are waning, and individuals are sort of waxing. And so I was reading this not only through the lens of, wow, culture for sure, but definitely the church. And it was fascinating. They were able to identify strengths and weaknesses of each. So I think there is a yearning for monoculture that isn't entirely healthy, because I think it is wonderful that so many other people have seats at the table now in the conversation. But I do think the erosion, he talks about the erosion of trust.
Yeah.
Where the cult perspective is we can't trust anything mainstream. And so the cult perspective is saying, no, we can't trust the elites. We can't trust the institutions. We can't trust the experts. It's only kind of us in this Gnostic secret group with special knowledge that are kind of the insiders of this thing. And I think that is a very, very dangerous place to be.
That's a question that arose for me as I was reading this interview. And it felt like a little bit of a paradox or a contradiction in his argument, because on the one hand, if there's no monoculture anymore and we're all just broken into these little tiny groups, is there a mainstream that these little groups can actually align against, or is it all just a fractured, like who are you?
There's a perception of a mainstream.
Yeah, so who are you distrusting though if there is no mainstream? Is it just a perception? Right. You construct this straw man of a mainstream that you can be against?
Well, look at Fox. They will rail against mainstream media, and they're one of the largest. They media are the largest. That's the irony. They are the single largest cable news network in the country, but they're not mainstream. Right, exactly, and that's the lure of the fragmentation. Is that I'm one of the initiated. I'm one of the ones that really knows what's going on. Kaitlyn, you were going to say something.
Well, just that, it depends what you think determines what is powerful. So conservative Christians will say, we're the marginalized or we're the exiled, in part because they're looking for certain markers of dominance or success or popularity, mostly in terms of like Hollywood, like what movies are getting made. So they're looking at that and going, oh, we're marginalized in that world, not paying enough attention to the great political power that they have. Or someone like Fox News is probably doing something similar, going like, we're not represented in this sphere. So that's who we're going to paint as the dominant force in the culture that we're in. And I do think it's important, you've alluded to this, but that Derek Thompson says like that's one of the defining features of this is that it's not just what you're for, but what you're against. Yeah. And Skye, you and I were talking about this last week of how that not only causes issues in terms of there's always this conflict that has to keep being fueled to make sense of the identity of the group, but also then you're not able to discern as well what you're for because you're just determining what you're for by being anti whatever this other group is for. So you're not able to see places of common ground or ways that they have a point. Like, a few weeks ago on the show, we were talking about Justin Giboney's article about John MacArthur and how he had said something about how MLK wasn't a Christian. And I said on the show that I loved that Justin was able to say, he's grievously wrong about this. He's right about this other thing. He's right that there are failures on the more progressive end of the spectrum. And there were people who responded to that show and were kind of like, no, he shouldn't have said that. MacArthur's wrong about everything. He can't be right about anything. And it's just like this pervasive way of thinking that, like you said earlier, I think, Skye, we want to slot everything into good and bad. And being in a quote unquote cult, as Derek Thompson is describing it, puts us in that mindset of we're the good guys, they're the bad guys. That's so everything coming from them by virtue of who they are has to be wrong. Instead of saying they know something that I might not know. There is something I might need to learn from them. There's things that my group might be wrong about. That becomes impossible when you have this insulated cultural world that is defined by being not what everyone else is.
Yeah, like one of my favorite idioms, which I use too much, is even a broken watch is right twice a day. And like, but that I say that frequently.
You use it self-descriptively.
I do sometimes, but like the reason I like it is it's a reminder that even the most broken thing can sometimes be right. And it's a reminder not to throw away everything, because even if the majority of it is bad, there can be something good here. And I need to be humble enough to receive that.
It's so much easier to trust labels.
Right.
And so, when you have a Christian radio station saying, hey, everything is safe for the whole family, but they're singing bad theology, right? That's not helping anybody develop into the kind of person that's actually doing the sifting and sorting the New Testament's inviting us into.
Yeah. Earlier, Kaitlyn and I were recording a couple episodes of Getting Schooled by Kaitlyn Schiess for our Holy Post Plus subscribers. And we were talking about discernment in a different realm, but the story that keeps coming to my mind, is probably because I'm doing doodles for this right now for my next book, is the story of the Good Samaritan. And obviously in the story, the Samaritan, who's seen as a heretic, according to the Jews at the time, does the good, compassionate thing and cares for his neighbor. And Jesus affirms that. Does that mean Jesus is affirming all Samaritan theology? Yeah. Of course not. And so he's calling us, and he's calling the man he's talking to discern, even the person whose theology is wrong at times can do what God is calling them to do. But
look at the Samaritan woman.
Right.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, but that's in the story, it's the Jews, it's the priest and the Levite who probably have the right theology, but don't do the right thing. And the story's all about, hey, don't judge people because of their label. Just because they have the right label, or maybe even the right doctrine or whatever, you got to be more discerning. Sometimes people with bad doctrine do good things, and sometimes people with good doctrine do bad things, and you got to be discerning. But this kind of going back to the Taylor Swift thing, we just want to label and move on. But does this? I think this article helped me understand part of the reason why people are so exhausted right now is without that monoculture, and with navigating all these little little cultures, it calls us to be discerning all the time. And that takes a lot of energy and mental activity. And who has time for that? I mean, just give me the answer already, right? So you guys are both part of churches that are relatively, I'm assuming, healthy. How do you see your church communities equipping people to practice that kind of long, obedient discernment?
Pastor?
Well, wow. I'm making sure you used a P there. Pastor, there are a couple of small ways. One of the ways we have people text in questions and do open Q&A after the teaching. And we've talked about it before on here. It is such a gift to me to have people who are questioning and discerning the stuff I'm even saying. And in a small way that kind of models what we're hoping, we talk about a lot, the big values. We want to make the Bible weird again, because we want people to approach the text with curiosity and humility, not assuming they know it because they heard it once. And that's that sort of hospitality of the text is what we're trying to inculcate through the Q&A for people like Taylor Swift. It's exactly right. The issue is not whether or not you let your kids listen to it. The issue is, how are you receiving those kinds of things from culture? Are you able to receive them well and joyfully? Or are you able to, or do you receive them kind of under threat and defensively? And so we have and really highlight people's questions through a podcast that we do. We have a discussion group that meets after the teaching, and then we do open Q&A. It's just an example. The other thing we do is, even when we're talking about controversial issues, we try to distinguish between what Paul would call matters of first importance versus disputable matters. Or even Paul will say things like, I wish you would believe this. And so that not everything needs to be the monocultural belief in even the confessing community, but there are all sorts of rooms. And so all sorts of room for people to disagree on disputable matters. And so one of the big disciplines I try to carry is to just keep the main thing, and not let secondary things become main things. And in doing, we're hoping that people can engage with a bit of discernment, knowing, hey, this is a battle worth fighting versus this is just not This isn't worthy of my time, because I think your analysis of why people are exhausted is exactly right. I've had people just say, just tell me, give me a list of authors that I can trust, and I'll read their books. I don't have the time or expertise to do the research. So I think there's something, to what you're saying, that the church can either jump in and define for everybody, well, here's what you have to think on everything, or we can help people kind of sift and sort what battles are worth fighting.
Excellent. And Kaitlyn, what are you seeing at your church?
Yeah. I mean, similar to what Mike was just saying, part of what I think the church in general offers us is a refuge from the exhaustion of having absolutely everything be up to our choice. Like, I do think a lot of young people in particular are going to end up coming, whether it's to the church or other people, and saying, just make it so that not absolutely everything about my identity is up to me. It's all choice, and every choice is available to me.
So good.
And my community. I mean, part of this cult thing is I get to choose from the internet, from, places I can drive to where I live in the country. I can choose the place I want to have be my community. And then I, filter my identity through that community. And that's a new thing in human history. It used to be, you're born here, that means you're a Presbyterian or an Anglican, or like you just kind of, this is where you are. And there's things about that are not good, but there's things about that are good. And so I think one of the things the church offers, to Mike's point, is, well, here are some foundational things. And you come in and you say the creeds and you sing the songs and you sit in the pew and you hear the word preached. And some of that's just kind of given. And yes, there is an element of this that is your personal assent to and belief in those things. But I love that there are weeks when parts of the creed, I'm like, I don't feel fully enthusiastic about that today, but someone sitting next to me does. And we together as a community are wholehearted about this belief. Or even, I was thinking about this recently, like one of my favorite things in church, I think I've said this on the podcast before, is anytime I get to stand up and make a promise to someone, I'm just like the first one up, because I want to make a promise to this kid who's getting baptized and say, like, yes, I will pray for you and I will, preach the gospel to you. And I mean, in my church, it's baptisms, confirmations, and new members. There is a liturgy for these people are joining our community. Will you as the community make these promises? And we stand up and say, we do. And I love doing that, in part because, goodness, does every element of my community have to be a choice I make about discerning who gets in and who doesn't? And I have to make all of those decisions. And when do enough of these people come in that I go, oh, this isn't me anymore, I gotta get out? There's something really beautiful about just discovering, as I sit in a pew, like, oh, these people belong to me now, and I'm making promises to them, and I will bring casseroles or bring moving boxes up or wipe a kid's nose, or like, that wasn't a choice. I didn't choose this community. In some sense I did, because I chose this church. But in another sense, there's this really beautiful human thing about just discovering obligations to other people instead of choosing them. And I appreciate that the church gives us that kind of foundational, these are my people, this is what we believe. And then to Mike's point, then there's these other things that we have to discern, that we aren't all going to agree on, that maybe even in this church we hope everyone agrees on, but we're welcoming of people who don't. And you have more freedom, I think, to feel like you're open to figuring those things out when you have this rooted center that you don't have to make up your mind for yourself.
That's right.
I think what you're describing, what you're both describing there, is when you apply a healthy family system to a congregation, right? A healthy family ideally is one in which there's commitment and there's a bond and there's boundaries, and that creates a safe space in which you can then explore, you can ask questions, you don't have to be anxious all the time that if I say the wrong thing or do the wrong thing, I'm gonna be cast out, whatever. So there's boundaries and parameters, but within that there's room to grow and develop and explore and all that. Okay, before we wrap up, a couple of quick things. Number one, like I said, hopefully Phil will be back next week. Continue to keep him and his family in your prayers. Number two, Mike, you and I are going to be together next week
that's my peak. That's my peak for next week.
With David French at your church for an evening with the Holy Post. That is May 9th, I believe.
May 9th.
And if I don't know if there's any tickets left, but if you want to be there and join us and engage with us live, you can go to holypost.com/events and sign up. Be fun. I mentioned that Kaitlyn and I just recorded some Getting Schooled episodes for Holy Post Plus people. We also have new episodes of Skye Pod coming out every Friday. I was asking the rest of the team, we got to do some calculations here, but we obviously put out a couple of I don't know, almost 2 hours worth of content every week between Holy Post and Curiously Kaitlyn, your new show. That's all available to anyone for free wherever. But we put out an enormous amount of content every week just for Holy Post Plus subscribers. And we got to calculate how much that is, but it's a lot. So if you think you're getting it all and that you're having the full Holy Post experience, let me tell you, you are not. You need to be part of the Holy Post Plus community and engage with all the other people who listen to the show, who get access to the live streams and the bonus episodes and the bonus interviews. Like, there's a lot back there. So go check it out. Go to holypost.com, sign up. There are price points for different things, different people, and you get the warm, fuzzy, happy feeling of knowing that you are contributing to us making more really good Christian content. So, Mike, thank you for filling in this week. I look forward to seeing you next week. That's going to be a ton of fun. Kaitlyn,
ditto.
Thanks for being back as well. And look forward to hearing your next episode of Curiously Kaitlyn. What's the question you guys
The
are
one
dealing
that
with
would
this
have
week?
just come out yesterday when you're listening to this is, how is God everywhere? Does he multiply? Because this kid said, people say God is always with you, but how is he everywhere? So we kind of talked about, like, is God like Santa Claus? He sees you when you're sleeping and he knows when you're awake. So the brilliant Beth Filker-Jones answers this one. Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's right. Yeah. Great.
Oh,
okay. Well, thank you all for listening. We have an interview coming up, so stay tuned and we'll see you next week. This episode is being sponsored by BetterHelp. When I was a younger man, I did not know how to handle stress. I tended to bottle it up, and it came out in really negative ways. For me, it manifested with physical heart palpitations. But through that experience, I learned healthy and unhealthy ways of dealing with stress. And one of the better ways is by talking to someone you can trust. Therapy is a safe place to get things off your chest and to figure out a healthy way of dealing with your stress. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online. It's designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire and you'll get matched with a licensed therapist, and you can switch therapists anytime for no additional charge. So learn how to get it off your chest with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/holypost today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/holypost. We are entering a really crazy time of year. Mother's Day's around the corner, Father's Day's coming up, there's graduation season, and of course, weddings. And that means you have to come up with a lot of gifts for a lot of important people in your life. And boy, have we got an idea for you. Songfinch lets you create an original radio-quality song inspired by your own life and the people you love. It's completely unique, personal, and lasts forever. Now, we tried this a couple months ago and we created an original song for Plinky Pete, Phil's ukulele. But more recently, I used Songfinch again to create a song to celebrate my daughter's college graduation. And I'll tell you, the song came out way better than even I expected. It's a tearjerker. The Songfinch website will walk you through the simple process to create your original song. You just tell them who the song is for, the style of the song you want, you share some personal details about your relationship, and then an actual Songfinch musician of your choice will write, record, and produce your original song in just a few days. So whether the song is for Mother's Day, Father's Day, an upcoming graduation or wedding, or just to show a loved one how much you care, you can start your song now to lock in a top Songfinch artist. For a limited time, Songfinch is letting our listeners upload their song to Spotify for free, so you and the lucky person you gift can listen to it anywhere, anytime. Go to songfinch.com/holypost and start your song. Again, the URL is songfinch.com/holypost. And thanks to Songfinch for sponsoring this episode. When Trump descended his golden escalator in 2015, most of us thought he was a political sideshow who didn't have a chance. Obviously, we were wrong. Almost everyone said he would lose to Hillary Clinton in the 2016 election. Wrong again. Some believed he'd never survive a full term in office, but somehow he got past 2 impeachments. And a lot of us, including members of his own administration, believed Trump's political career was obliterated after his actions, or more accurately his inaction, on January 6, 2021. But we were wrong again. Despite facing over 90 state and federal criminal indictments and being found liable for sexual assault, Donald Trump's grip on the Republican Party and white evangelicals is as strong as ever. Which raises the question, what will it take for the party to move on from Trump, or is it too late? To answer that question, I've invited Pete Wehner back on the show. He's a lifelong conservative and an evangelical, and his involvement with the GOP goes all the way back to his time in the Reagan administration. And he's written a lot about the Trump era in the New York Times and the Atlantic. Peter Wehner served in 3 Republican administrations. He was the deputy director of speechwriting for George W. Bush and became the head of the White House Office of Strategic Initiatives in 2002. After leaving the White House in 2007, Wehner joined the Ethics and Public Policy Center as a senior fellow. He's also served as an advisor for several presidential campaigns. Today, he's a senior fellow at the Trinity Forum and a contributing opinion writer for the New York Times and a contributing editor at The Atlantic. His most recent book is The Death of Politics: How to Heal Our Frayed Republic After Trump. Here's my conversation with Pete Wehner. Peter Wehner, welcome back to the Holy Post.
Great to be with you. Thanks for having me on.
So a couple weeks ago, you wrote a piece for The Atlantic, and it began by talking about Governor Chris Sununu from New Hampshire. And he has been a pretty strong critic of Donald Trump. He supported Nikki Haley in the recent primary. He has called Trump a loser. He says he's responsible for what happened on January 6, 2021. Sununu said Trump's not a real Republican. He's likely to be convicted in one or more of these cases he's currently facing before different courts. And yet, in that interview, Sununu said he'll vote for Trump anyway. What's behind that kind of position? And you critique it in your article, but how do you explain somebody being that negative on Trump, even calling him a non-Republican, but saying he'll support him?
Cowardice, lack of principle,
Okay.
and a loss of a moral compass. I think when one analyzes the Republican Party, the MAGA world, and who supports Trump, there's obviously a spectrum. And on one end of the spectrum are the true believers. I would say Paul Gosar, Marjorie Taylor Greene, and others probably fall into that category. I think they're lunatics in many ways, and they're certainly dangerous. But I think they on some level believe what is being said, and they believe the conspiracy theories. On the other end of the spectrum, and I think there are a lot more people in the Republican Party on this end of the spectrum, is that they know better. They know who and what Donald Trump is. I think they know the threat that he poses, but they're cynical. They're saying one thing privately, which is that they understand the moral disorder of his mind is lawlessness. But publicly, they're defending him. And the reason that they're doing that is that they've made the calculation, and I think it's probably a correct calculation, that the base of the party is so radicalized, so deformed, that to speak out against Donald Trump guarantees you a boatload of trouble. And the people who have done that, Liz Cheney preeminent among them, are targeted. I mean, you think about Liz Cheney, she was the number 3 person in the House leadership. She came from what is essentially GOP royalty, given her parents. And she is a rock-ribbed conservative. And what was her sin? Her sin was to be on the January 6th Commission, criticize Donald Trump for what Chris Sununu himself concedes Trump did, which is to attempt an insurrection. And what happens to her? She's primaried, then Speaker of the House. Kevin McCarthy goes in and campaigns against her, almost an unprecedented act. And she's persona non grata. So I think this gets back to the radicalization of the base, and that has radiating effects. And there are people in Congress and the political world more generally on the right that had a choice to make. And most of them, the overwhelming majority of them, have done what Chris Sununu did, which is a collapse of conscience.
So, yeah, there seems to be an instinct of self-preservation. You saw that at work during the GOP primary. There were, 12 candidates in the early debate. They were asked, if Donald Trump is the nominee, will you support him? And I think other than, Chris Christie and Asa Hutchinson, everyone raised their hand and said yes. And I agree with you. I think it is because the base has been radicalized and they know we can't survive, or I can't survive in this party if I don't kiss the ring of Donald Trump, which goes then to the question is, what radicalized the base, and what role has conservative media played in this whole process? It feels like a snake eating its own tail, where
Right.
the media supports Trump, and then Trump radicalizes, and around it goes, and you can't stop. But from your perspective, somebody who's been in media for a long time, how has that contributed? And is it the cart leading the horse, or is it how would you put the order of guilt in this whole mess?
Yeah, it's a good question. I'd say that there's a synergy going on between the right wing media ecosystem and the base. I'd say if you had to, have the needle lean one way or the other, it's more the base leading the right wing talk show hosts and the right wing media world than vice versa. If you listen to Rush Limbaugh, even decades ago, he basically said and understood that he was in an entertainment medium, and he was there to entertain his audience. And these people who were radio talk show hosts and others have a pretty finely tuned antenna. They're a weather vane. They don't really go against what their listeners want. I think they view themselves, and this is something I didn't see nearly as clearly in the past as I do now, almost as salesmen, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if you're selling Toyotas, you're not going to say something good about Hondas. And if you're part of the American right, you're going to view the American left and Democrats as enemies. And sometimes you may feel that's genuine, but they have to constantly fan those flames of anger and fear. And so I think that the media, though, has played a huge role in this as the echo chamber, stirring up passions, emotions, the amygdala regions of the mind. And then, of course, with the advent of social media, that's, doubled the effects. In terms of what happened to the base, and I've thought a lot about this, and it's a really fascinating question to ponder, because Donald Trump didn't appear ex nihilo. It's not as if he came out of nothing in 2016. He tapped into something that was pre-existing. He overcame enormous odds. I mean, by the standards of modern American presidential campaigns, there's no way Trump should have gotten the nomination, but he did, and he did easily, which meant that things were primed for him to come up, and he had an intuitive sense of what buttons to push. So, as you said, that begs the question: what was going on? I mean, I think it's several things. These currents were in motion for decades. Some of it was grievance and resentment that had built up for many, many years, feelings on the American right that they'd been dishonored, disrespected by the elite media, elite institutions. And there's something to that. I think it's over-dramatized a lot. Some of it is fear that they've talked themselves into, or that they genuinely believe. And this is an ongoing thing. You've seen it for decades, which is if a Democratic president wins, the Democratic Party gets control, it's going to push the country to the edge or over the edge. So it's very much of a mindset of catastrophism, of apocalypse. And so that is a factor in it as well. And then I think also, and this may be unstated, loss of power. The country is becoming more diverse. The Republican Party, especially the white evangelical movement, is predominantly white, and America has been ruled by predominantly white people. And I think the change, the diversity that's happening has unnerved a lot of people. So I think it's a concoction of different emotions and feelings that seem to come together. And then Trump, as I said, took advantage of it. And of course, once he got the nomination, especially when he became president, all of those things got amplified.
Yeah, I was curious, given your experience in the Bush White House, the George W. Bush White House, did you have any signs or any indication that the religious right in that era could morph into what we're seeing now? Did you see that grievance, the fear, the catastrophizing? And what was your perception of it 20 years ago?
Yeah, it's an interesting thing to ponder. I would say that those elements have existed probably for 50 years. If you go back and examine the history of the evangelical movement, the inflection point was really the 70s. Right? Prior to the 70s, for a variety of reasons, there was not real political activism or even social justice concerns among the evangelical movement. That has its own pedigree, its own genesis. Some of it goes back to the 20s and
Right.
the Scopes Monkey trial. Some of it was theological. If you took, for example, Jerry Falwell Sr. As an avatar of that movement, if you listen to Jerry Falwell back in the 1960s. Think about him as a kind of avatar. He was saying we shouldn't be involved in politics. Our job is to save souls. Having the kingdom of God corrupted by the kingdom of the world is not a good idea. So he was on the sidelines, even though he himself was a segregationist critic of Martin Luther King Jr. By the time you get to the late 70s, you have the religious right, of which Falwell is the key figure, but not the only one. There's Paul Weyrich, there's Pat Robertson, there's Beverly LaHaye, there are others. Whole series of events happened in the 70s that catalyzes their involvement, of which abortion was actually not central. Abortion was a central issue to the Catholic Church, not to evangelicals, at least for a while. Then you have the moral majority, started in the late 90s. It becomes key in the election of Ronald Reagan in 1980. So they then are involved. And if you read the rhetoric of the people, Francis Schaeffer, Falwell, Robertson, others, that catastrophism I mentioned exists. And the brutality of the politics is in some ways pre-shadowed. By the time you get to when I was in the White House, which is sort of the 2000s, 2001, 2008, in terms of the evangelical involvement, I think they were a little bit calmed down. Their apocalyptic rhetoric was less. But if you read, for example, what Robertson and Falwell said about the attacks on 9/11, they were horrifying. They were saying that this was God's judgment on America because of abortion and gay rights and so forth. So all of that existed. I think it was a bit calmer when we were in the White House. I do think that the election of Barack Obama pushed a lot of them over the edge.
Yeah, let's talk about that abortion piece a little bit, because obviously we live in an interesting moment where Roe has been overturned and different states are fighting and wrestling about what their policy should be. Pro-life Republicans, it seems, have abandoned some of their principles. And Trump has said that he does not support a national abortion ban. He believes that it should be left up to the states. But at the same time, he's saying what Arizona has chosen to do in a pretty much a complete ban on abortion, he says is wrong. And he disagrees with Alabama in choosing to ban the IVF treatments. So on one hand, he's saying leave it up to the states. But on the other hand, he's saying what these states are doing are wrong. And I don't support a ban. That is not a pro-life position. That is a pro-choice position. And yet a huge number of pro-life Republicans, pro-life groups, evangelical and conservative Christian leaders are still supporting Trump. So given the role that abortion has played and the catastrophizing that has been used since the 1970s and 80s around this issue, what do you make of that seemingly 180 that they've done on this issue?
Yeah, I think it's further manifestation of the cynicism that I talked about earlier and the almost cult-like effect that Trump has on this movement. It is as if the movement, different movements on the American right, once they decided to go with Trump, even if they had some concerns, some caveats about it in the early days of the Trump era, which would have been 2015, 2016, those quickly gave way to what I've referred to as a psychology of accommodation. That is, they accommodated themselves to him year after year, event after event, and he changed them. They didn't change him. And so there was a bonding to Trump. And you're quite right. I mean, the arguments that Trump made, that Carrie Lake have made, are essentially Mario Cuomo arguments. I'm personally opposed to abortion, but publicly I'm not. And you know, the thing that was central to the pro-life cause first was overturning Roe v. Wade, which was done in large measure because of the Trump judges. But after that, it does go to the states, and then you need particularly persuasive voices, moral voices, to try and get people to embrace the pro-life cause. And that's not easy because the inclination, the disposition, the tropism of the country is to be pro-choice. What they got in Donald Trump is the opposite. This is a person who's not himself pro-life. He can't articulate pro-life arguments. And at the first signs that abortion is a problematic issue in terms of politics, he abandons the position, but they stay with him. Now, part of that is because they feel like he was a pro-life president and because Roe was overturned. But I think what's the deeper thing that's going on is that this attachment to Trump was made. And, Tony Perkins said years ago, we give this guy a mulligan. This was on the moral things. I want to say one other thing, Skye, about abortion, which I just don't think gets enough attention. Because I think the issue has to be disaggregated a little bit for the evangelical movement. There is the position on abortion, right, which is abortion is a horrible act, even the murder of a child. And anybody who holds the pro-choice position is embracing an immoral point of view. Then there's actual number of abortions. And here's what's really interesting. If you took 1980 as your baseline year or 1990 as your baseline year, the number of abortions have gone down significantly more during Democratic presidencies than Republican presidencies. There was a drop of 22% in the number of abortions during the Obama era. So by the time Obama leaves office in 2016, the abortion rate is lower than it was when Roe v. Wade was ruled in 1973. When has abortion actually gone up in the last 30 years? During the Trump presidency. Now, it's not all cause and effect. I mean, it's a complicated question. Are there policies the Democrats promote, whether birth control or otherwise, that may lead to fewer abortions, or is this incidental? Is it such a complicated issue that what the president does really doesn't matter? However you answer that question, the key premise, the key narrative that the pro-life movement has been pushing, which is if you vote for a Democratic president, you're voting for many more abortions, is empirically not true. And this would be a really interesting question to pose to them, which is if, for whatever constellation of reasons, voting for a Democratic president led to fewer abortions than a Republican president, even though they themselves are pro-choice, would you vote for them? And however they would answer that question, what they need to accept, what they should accept if they were intellectually and morally honest, is that to vote for a Democratic president doesn't mean that you're going to get a higher number of abortions. It doesn't mean that you don't make the argument or that you're not offended by those who are pro-choice, but it doesn't mean empirically that you're voting for more abortions. But they won't accept that because to change that narrative is to shatter their worldview, and their mind won't let them go to that place.
Yeah, I'm glad you bring that up because you're obviously very familiar with the statistics, and we've talked about this from time to time on our show. Under every president, Reagan, Bush 41, Clinton, Bush 43, Obama, the abortion rate has been falling. It fell quicker under Democratic administrations than Republicans, as you said. And then it started going up under the Trump administration. And the early data we've seen is that since Roe's been overturned, the number of actual abortions has increased in the United States. It has not gone down. And to your point, I wrote about this a while ago, but I wonder if there's a certain segment of the politically active conservative Christian right which cynically is not as interested in actually solving the issue of abortion. They're interested in the symbol of abortion.
Right.
And that means the actual number of pregnancies that are saved is not as important as getting the right law on the books so that symbolically, I feel like I am not a citizen of a country that allows abortion, even if the actual number increases. What we care about is the symbolism of the law on the page. It's wrong. Our country says it's wrong. Therefore, I feel righteous belonging to a country that says it's wrong, even though the actual number of abortions may actually go up.
Yeah, I think that's a very good insight. And I think it's one that really has to be considered and taken seriously because of precisely what you said, because of what the empirical data shows. I don't have any question that what you just described is a factor in what's going on. Just two points about that to amplify a bit on what you said. One is think about the southern border, right? The Republicans on a daily basis focus in on the chaos on the southern border, and rightly so. It really is. It is a crisis. And if I were to go through and judge the Biden presidency, which I think is a mixed record, but a lot of things are better under Biden than under Trump. But one area that's not is the southern border. But what happened a couple of months ago, the strongest border security bill probably in our lifetime was there for the taking. It was crafted in large measure by Republicans. And what happened? Donald Trump said, don't vote Republicans for this bill, because if you do, it's going to make things better and it's going to hurt my reelection chances. And the Republicans saluted, and that border bill was not passed. So what they're doing is two things at the same time. They're complaining vehemently about the chaos on the border, even as they're sabotaging the best legislation to get rid of the chaos on the southern border. And secondly, I had a recent exchange with a person in the right-wing ecosystem about crime, and it was very revealing of the MAGA mindset. He had mentioned that crime was surging. And I said, whatever reasons that you want to oppose Joe Biden, surging crime isn't one of them, because in 2023, we had a dramatic, even a historic drop in violent crime, particularly in murder. And the crime numbers have gone down under Biden. Now, some of that was because in 2020, you had a historic increase in crime, in large part, I would say, because of the pandemic, but that was under Trump's watch. And to see how he was dealing with the empirical evidence that I was showing to him that crime drop was fascinating. First, he said it's not true. Then he would send me links to crime in DC that was going up, as if you couldn't have individual cities have increases in crime and nationally go down. And so what I saw, and I knew this already, but it was just more on vivid display because I had these exchanges with this individual, was a mindset that did not want to hear good news, because this is the premise of the American right in terms of why do we have to vote for Donald Trump. It's complicated because on some level, many of them know that this is a person of borderless corruption and moral depravity. And yet they are cheerleading for him and they're voting for him. So how do you deal with the cognitive dissonance that creates, particularly if you're a Republican who for years talked about the centrality of character in political leaders, how important that is? One way that you do it is you create a picture of American carnage, of America as a hellscape if Joe Biden wins. But Joe Biden's been president for 3.5 years. And this is not a hellscape by most objective measures. As I said, a number of things have gotten better. But again, psychologically, they can't go there. They have to hold on to this narrative of darkness to be able to justify their support for Trump.
Absolutely, yeah. The cynical approach they took to the border bill. We actually took a trip to the border in October with a bunch of Holy Post pundits and talked to border agents, and people who listen to the show have heard all this stuff. And so to realize that the Republican Party was being offered pretty much everything they asked for at the border and turned it down because it would be bad for Donald Trump's reelection chances if this issue were solved. Exactly. It's just incredibly disturbing. In the time we have left, let's talk about the future. Donald Trump isn't going to be around forever, whether that's politically or just biologically. He's a finite creature. He's going to go away at some point. Is there a future for the GOP, or has this era corrupted it beyond redemption? Is it, I mean, Liz Cheney has in a number of different interviews said that she thinks the Republican Party is probably beyond saving, and a new party probably needs to be born. What's your perspective, having been decades in the conservative movement as an evangelical, having worked for a Republican administration? Do you see signs that this party can be turned back to its principles, or is it too late?
Well, in the short term, it's too late. In the short term, I mean, certainly this year and probably in the next several years, the imprint that Donald Trump has left on the Republican Party is probably greater than Ronald Reagan did, and that's saying something if one understands the history of the Republican Party. So it's a thoroughly magnified party, and it's given birth to all sorts of Trumplets, people who have embraced his view. And if you look, for example, on the vote, say aid to Ukraine, when the Republicans who voted against it, a significant number of the Republicans who voted against aid for Ukraine were elected after 2018, and they're 50 years or younger. So that what that means is that the most recent Republicans and the younger Republicans are more MAGA-fied, more of the, say, call them the pro-Putin party than the pro-American party. And a lot of people are leaving Congress who are more responsible. Obviously, Liz Cheney was one, but people like Mike Gallagher and many others. So, in a sense, the party is kind of getting down to its radioactive core of MAGA supporters. You look at a person like Elise Stefanik as a symbol of what happened. She was a George W. Bush Republican, compassionate conservatism, and it's completely flipped over for utterly cynical reasons. So that's going to stay there for a while. I would say, as a qualifier on that statement, is that there is some number of Republicans in the GOP who are committed against Trump. I mean, as recently as the week that we're taping this, we're taping it on April 24th. 15% voted for Nikki Haley in a primary in which he's long ago dropped out of. You had Mike Pence, who was Trump's vice president, obviously, say that he wouldn't vote for him under any circumstances. Mitt Romney has said the same thing. Paul Ryan has said the same thing. Liz Cheney has said it. Dick Cheney, her father, has said it. So I think there is a group, not an insignificant number of Republicans who won't vote for Trump, who don't consider themselves MAGA and want the Republican Party to be reformed. They're not strong enough to change it, but they're strong enough to complicate life. So a fellow good friend of mine and writer, Jonathan Rausch, and I wrote a piece called There's a Way Out of MAGA Domination, and talked about a sort of free Republican Party, a Republican Party in exile. And we use as an example, with the appropriate qualifiers, of de Gaulle and the Free France movement, which is not to make your inner peace with MAGA, but to stay within the party, to continue to articulate the traditional views of conservatism, to have a forward-looking agenda. But those groups of individuals need to get together, because I think that the MAGA movement is built on lies and it's antagonistic to the American founding. And so I think in that way it's unstable and maybe unsustainable. But it's going to be a long haul. And the last thing I'll say is, going into a third party, those just have not worked in American history. I don't know what's going to happen to the Republican Party. I've been really since 2015, 2016, warning about it and repeatedly saying that I thought that Republicans were underestimating the power of Trump and the MAGA movement, thinking that they would take exit ramps. And I've warned again and again and again, they're not going to take those exit ramps. You don't fully understand the grip that this person has on the party. But there are inflection points in the life of an individual, the life of a nation, the life of a party, and those can happen quickly. And often they happen without us really foreseeing them. A number of factors come into play. Certainly once Trump leaves the scene, whether he's defeated in 2024 election this year or afterward, that'll open things up. But it's impossible, I think, for anyone to know what direction it's going to go into. What we know is in the here and the now, it's a thoroughly MAGA-fied party.
Yeah, the part that concerns me perhaps the most is, in my limited study of these things, the way parties change is by losing. They realize a platform wasn't successful or a candidate wasn't successful, and then they adapt. This is what happened after 2012 when Mitt Romney lost his bid to take over from Obama. The Republican Party did their famous autopsy, where they did a deep dive and going, why did we lose? And looking at all this. The problem with MAGA and Trump is they don't believe they've ever lost. And if that may happen again in 2024, if they don't accept reality, then they can't change and grow. And they have that, going back to what we talked about with the media ecosystem, they have this entire massive environment that they live in online and in Fox News and on various social media algorithm fed sites that keep them locked. Just the other day when I was perusing the news sites around the passing of the bills to aid Ukraine and Israel and the TikTok ban, all that was being passed through the House. And I was reading about it on CNN.com. I saw it on the Drudge Report. I saw it on a few other websites. Then I went over to Fox News and I scrolled through the entire page.
Yeah.
And the news is just not reported. So how do you get a party to reform itself when it's not even facing reality and it's being aided in that illusion by the media that keeps them locked in that? And the free Republican, sub party that you're talking about, and those principled voices that are still there, while I'm glad they're there, they don't have access to that media. They're not being platformed and profiled, so people are locked in their illusions. I'm not offering a question, just an observation, but do you see that cracking at some point?
I don't know. I mean, I completely agree with what you described. It's a pretty bleak picture, and you're right. It's part of it is that they don't accept that they lost, but part of it is, even if they accepted that they lost, I mean, the reality is in 2018, 2020, 21, Republicans did poorly 2022 midterms. That's just reality. And not in the reality of whether they accept it or not, in the reality of who's governing, right?
Right.
There are just fewer House Republicans, the Democrats took control of the Senate. Biden is president, not Trump. So something is different. You're quite right. You mentioned Mitt Romney. Think about George H.W. Bush, right? One-term president, gets beat, exit stage left. Think about Jimmy Carter, 76, gets defeated by Reagan in 1980, leaves the scene. Other Democrats, Walter Mondale, Mike Dukakis. I mean, when they lost, whether they were a one-term president or a nominee that didn't become president, in almost every case, the party says, thanks very much for your service, see you later, and they look elsewhere. Trump was different. He gets beat, the Republican Party had been hurt, and yet that grip remains. And again, this goes to the peculiar psychological nature of this moment, this movement, and this party, and the cult-like hold that he has on it. And as long as we're dealing with that, not much can happen. Now, whether that will break, we'll see. You do begin to see fissures within the American right. I mean, look at the Daily Wire and Candace Owen versus Ben Shapiro, for example, or Tucker Carlson and others. So you're seeing it begin to kind of crack apart. Revolution eats its own. And it may be, in the end, as I said earlier, unsustainable, but not right now. And in this moment, I think it's almost impossible to overstate the faux-generated and authentically felt hatred and fear that the right has about Biden and the Democratic Party. And if you listen to talk radio, I mean, that's the thing they go back to. It's day after day after day, hour after hour after hour. It's constantly getting people worked up. It's a mob mentality. The weird thing, of course, is that they claim to be heirs of constitutionalism, the founding fathers, and conservatism. And yet the American right today is fundamentally anti-conservative and enemies of the Constitution. And if you ask yourself, well, what was it that the founders most feared? What was it? It was mob mentality, right? That's the reason we have separation of powers. And if you read Abraham Lincoln's Young Men's Lyceum speech when he was 28 years old about the fear of the mob, that kind of irrational emotions when it gets into politics can lead to real destruction. You saw it obviously with the French Revolution and how that was distinguished from the American Revolution. And yet those very people who would claim the founding and say, like Mark Levin, that he's a constitutional conservative, and yet they are the main threats overwhelmingly to not just to the Constitution itself. After all, they supported a man who led an insurrection and attempted a coup. But in terms of temperament, sensibility, and disposition, they're a radicalized group and they're a dangerous group. And I'm not sure that they're going to let anything stop them. And so it's up to the rest of us to do what we can to stop them.
Scripture says the devil masquerades as an angel of light, and in a way, the tyrant masquerades as a patriot today.
Yeah, it's a good line.
And hopefully we see the end of that soon. Peter Wehner, thank you for your insight and wisdom and your experience in politics and media. It's immensely helpful. Thank you for confirming what I suspected, but offering a degree of hope that there are good voices out there. I'd love to have you back on in the future as we see where all this unfolds. And I'll keep reading what you're producing in the Atlantic and elsewhere. Thanks again.
Thanks a lot, Skye. I appreciate being with you, and thanks for continuing to be a faithful voice. It matters.
The Holy Post podcast is a production of Holy Post Media, produced by Mike Strelo, editing by Seth Gorvet. Help us create more thoughtful Christian media by subscribing to Holy Post Plus at holypost.com/plus. Also, be sure to leave a review on Apple Podcasts so more people can discover thoughtful Christian commentary, plus ukulele and occasional butt news. Visit holypost.com for show notes, news stories, Holy Post merchandise, and much, much more.